I'm Tom Mennier, and you're listening to CVS Podcast. CVS presents a two-way Q&A with David Ross and Tom Mennier. This is the second five-part series in which Tom and David continue their discussions on matters of theological and cultural concern. A two-way Q&A, Series 2, Part 1. Questions on unity and the distinctions between the naturalists' and the theists' concept of love.
How do you understand unity to be an essential feature of the self, the family, society, politics, and religion? And this question is in the broad context of all my questions today, which have to do with the transcendental properties, the one, the good, the true, the beautiful, and some people add other transcendentals. So this first question has to do with unity in the self, the family, society, politics, and religion.
Well, there's an old saying, united we stand, divided we fall. I think nations are held together by shared customs and values. Communities are held together by shared interests and values, the protection of children, etc. Personal relationships are held together by mutual understanding, trust, confidentiality, shared values, and so on. And Christians are united as brothers and sisters by their fidelity to and love of the Word of God and the good news of Christ. How can one detect a person who has no real sincere interest in unity? They're usually the ones that avoid confrontation, avoid debate, are offended at being held to account. They would rather people go along to get along. You could be fooled into thinking they're the ones that are trying to be the peacemakers. And I think the opposite is true. They would rather people go along to get along. They would rather a world of false peace and even phoniness than face the dangerous path of truth, knowledge, love, authenticity, all these things that are impossible without true unity. We are in a very divided world right now. There's very little unity left, it seems. It's crumbling all around us. And this division, I think, is being propelled and exacerbated by those people that are trying to silence certain voices, that are pushing ideologies and a power play rather than engaging in true dialogue. They're not facing their enemy, they're facing them down without understanding them. And the situation only seems to be getting worse from year to year. Meanwhile, there are voices emerging trying to bring reasoned, rational arguments and knowledge and history to the table to mitigate some of the fundamental errors that are springing up all around us. Those are the ones that are fighting for unity, but they're seen as the enemy because they're allegedly sowing discord and offending people. Unity is a project. There's the only true transcendental unity is the oneness of God. Unity is not and never was guaranteed among men and women, among people. Just like I say the word humanity, the scientific term, I guess, for what we are as Homo sapien. Humanity is a religious word, is the way I see it. Humanity is a project. It involves the will and it involves the individual. And love is voluntary, and it's real or it's not. The thirst and desire for truth and self-knowledge is entirely your responsibility. And the greatest achievements in civilization in any given community and among individuals throughout history came from people in their solitude and in their sincere efforts and will on their own volition discover something discover some truth and live by it, and are mocked and persecuted, and eventually the truth has a ripple effect, and then there's statues of these people 100 or 200 years later, or whatever. To me, the lesson from that is unity takes effort, just like freedom, liberty, the ideal of democracy. It's not something that's written down on paper and you can wipe your hands clean and say, haha, we made it. Now we have a democracy. I have my job and my freedom to do what I want and raise my family and show up at the polls every 4 years or whatever and vote. No. And the founding fathers of America have made it explicitly clear. Benjamin Franklin and all these people talked about how, and they were absolutely right, even if they were Freemasons. They know a lot. but the truth that we can get from that is that freedom is an ongoing battle. It takes vigilance to defend it. More often than not, people don't, because there are so many pressure points in place that threaten their career and even their life. So it's a devil's game. Courage is a requisite, as C.S. Lewis said. All the virtues have courage at its foundation, because none of the virtues could actually manifest without courage. And God's word reminds us repeatedly through Scripture to be not afraid. That's exactly what it means. So this is how I see unity. Unity is not just agreeing on something and being done with it. How does a family stay together? I think God's way is that, He designed it in a way that every individual, if there's 3 or more, 5, 10 siblings, they're all remarkably different. They come from the same gene pool, the same 2 sets of genes from their parents, and yet they might as well come from different countries. They can be so radically different from each other in their character and their temperament. And so it's a natural thing to have family rivalry. I think the battle of life is a perfect and beautiful thing. God made it that way because we cannot know ourselves or others. We cannot climb to higher and broader and deeper states of consciousness without the challenge. And the test is we either fold and become cynical monsters, embittered, resentful, or we turn the spotlight back at ourselves and learn something from it. But in a sense of real understanding, once you really understand the enemy, you've come to understand yourself. And then you can actually be a meaningful vessel of peace and progress in the intellectual and consciousness realm, in life itself, not just within your family. Then you're a warrior. Then you can play the battle and in a way that benefits everyone. In a nutshell, that's how I see unity working in every realm: self, family, politics, religion, etc. Yeah.
Few thoughts come to mind. One is there was a street fighter, I forget his name now, he passed away. Kimbo Slice, I think his name was. Tough guy, black guy, street fighter, and he was always talking about the enemy, the enemy, the enemy, the enemy. And he would pray to God about the enemy, the enemy, the enemy, and enemy. And he finally, he sort of by a slip of the tongue, he said, inner me, inner me. And he realized the enemy, the enemy is the inner me. The enemy is the inner me, and he had an epiphany. He had a change of orientation, and his spiritual life blossomed. Because he realized the enemy is the inner me. So that's powerful. The other thing that comes to mind is Socrates, the gadfly. He's called the gadfly because he annoys people with his questions.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so Socrates as the principle of unity. We don't think of him that way, but he is the principle of unity because he is asking questions.
Yes.
He's asking you to confront the enemy, aka the inner me. Oh, you think this? Do you really think this? If you think that, then what about this? How dare you ask me that, you annoying gadfly?
Yeah, that's it.
I am a senator. You are nothing. I am someone who, do you know who you're talking to?
Do you know who I am?
So identity politics is as old as the hills.
Yeah.
But the Socratic method as a principle of unity, that just came to me today while you were speaking.
Yeah.
That we annoy people when we confront them with the truth, and the cowardly mediocrity of saying, well, that's impolite, let's not go there.
Yeah.
That's not going to help us individually, it's not going to help us in our family, it's not going to help us in society, in politics, or anything else.
Yes.
So the gadfly approach to unity, it's painful, but it's necessary.
Yeah.
That's basically what I got from your speech.
Yes. It's necessary. It's painful, of course. We need to discuss things, and it can be painful. It can be very challenging, and it's like laying your ego on the line. When it's hard to get your point across and people are disagreeing and then poking fun at you and making fun of you and calling you with this and that, suck it up. Look at you, you're hurling it back. If you can't take it, then don't sling it. But if you're going to sling it, then be the one that can take it as well. And then it's out in the open. The steam has been vented, and hopefully we learn something about your character. How well do you fight, and how well do you maintain charity and love for those people that disagree with you?
So it reminds me of Jesus when he said, did you strike me because I'm wrong? I mean, if so, what did I say wrong? Correct me, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And it's like when you're in a Twitter battle or whatever online, and they're upset and angry and offended, and they block you or threaten you or whatever. It's like, are you angry because I'm right, or are you angry because I'm wrong? If I'm wrong, don't be angry. Just correct me, enlighten me.
That's right.
And if I'm right, don't be angry.
Exactly.
Just, let's move forward together. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying I'm wrong. But either way, hostility and defensiveness is not
that's right.
a healthy response.
Yeah, and that's the fundamental difference right there. That sort of lays it out very clearly, because in these sort of heated debates, we're responding to what our opponents are saying, and we're answering them to their face. And they always have that chance, and they're going to take it, damn it, to say their response to what we said, and so on. But when you cancel people, that's a sign of weakness. That's a sign of hostility, absolutely. It is the... not to get overly dramatic, but it's necessary to say, it is the mindset of genocide. When a society is infected with this kind of black and white view of right and wrong, and I have identified the enemy without even actually understanding the enemy, and then taking a bold stance against them to the point where they're censoring them and canceling them, it's one thing you see a bad character now and then with this trait, but when it infects society as a whole, then you've got a society with the mentality of genocide. And people should take that a little more seriously and examine that in themselves as well.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't treat rodents, rats or mice, the way humans treat other humans.
Yeah.
When I find an infestation, I lived in Little India here in Montreal. Mm-hmm. When I had an infestation, I knew the neighborhood was infested. I knew it was a given. And I had compassion and love for these little cute mice. And I didn't want to kill them, even though it was probably the right thing to do to kill them. And I've had people chastise me for this. But I just transported them away and let them go. Because I'm not saying it's the right thing. I'm not defending my choice. But it's symptomatic of my humanity, not to boast about my humanity. But it bodes well for how I'll treat other humans. Yeah. Given the fact that some people wouldn't blink an eye to eradicate the vermin, but these vermin play a role. They're there because of the food. They're innocent and they're just doing their job. They're eating and they're going where the food is. So it's the same thing with your enemy ideologically. Extermination usually isn't the answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you understand the ecosystem, the larger picture, and why they're there, and what purpose they're serving, and how God's using them, and so on and so forth, you'll have a softer touch for sure.
Absolutely. What's the difference between loving God and loving the universe? Apart from the distinction between loving the Creator and loving creation, there are materialistic naturalists who don't even acknowledge creation, thinking that the universe itself is eternal and was not created. What then are the limitations imposed on the concept of love by the materialists?
Yeah, so first of all, to define and distinguish love of creation from love for the Creator, we love creation for the sake of God, for the sake of the Creator, and we love God for Himself, in and of Himself. He is goodness itself. So that's the major distinction between creature and Creator. We don't wish God well, but I wish my fellow creatures well. Mm-hmm. So when I love you, I'm commending you to God, but I do not commend God to God. God is God, and He cannot be separated from God or go against God's will because He is God. So if we impoverish ourselves by pretending that we have a universe which is eternal and that there's no supernatural creator, then what will we do? There are one of two mistakes we could make. We could only love relative goods with reference to the greatest good, which would be, in a materialist world, would be the universe. And I've heard people talk about the universe. I'm going to set my intentions, send it out to the universe, and the universe will provide me with what I need. And the New Age sorts of ideas. So we could commend our brothers and sisters, if we are materialists, we could commend them to the universe, which is the sum total of all that is in their worldview, in their impoverished worldview. But that conglomerate of all the configurations of matter, energy, and space-time that is the universe, that is all in all, according to the materialist, it does not have in and of itself wisdom or love or will or reason or anything else. So creation becomes like an idol, a dead idol, and as it says in the Bible, we who have arms and eyes and tongues are worshipping these dead idols that do not have eyes and arms and tongues and minds and wills and have no capacity to help us. We can help the idol, but the idol cannot help us. So this is the absurd contradiction entailed in a materialist worldview, and when it comes to our will and therefore to what we love, if we limit ourselves to the material, we're impoverishing ourselves. And so the other way we could go with it is to attribute divinity to the material, to the universe, and say that the universe does have a will. It does have the capacity to love. It does care for us. Mother Earth does care for us. Mother Earth is wounded by our sins, our ecological sins against her, and these sorts of things, which is no less absurd, and I would say more absurd than the sort of atheistic materialism and the sort of
and they contradict themselves too.
Either way, it's a contradiction.
It's a contradiction, but out of their own mouths, many of these people of this naturalistic, materialistic worldview admit frequently, when it's convenient, that nature is cruel and dangerous and violent, and whole species come and go without any mercy and so on. So they're able to see that and admit it. And then when they're pushing the corner on deeper existential problems and ontological meanings of things, then they sort of change their tune and say, well, the universe is like elevated to a kind of God. They skirt the fence of this New Age idea when it suits their needs, so the contradiction becomes blatant at certain points when they're challenged on bigger issues. I've noticed anyway in conversations with some of these people of this worldview. So yeah, the real problem that I have with the trends in modern thinking is precisely to do with love and meaning, because to me it presents a very serious problem. when a worldview takes kind of a hold of society and leads to actual consequences. The degradation of intellect and of will and meaning itself. Like dreams, are they just random exhaust fumes from the day in the brain, neurocircuitry just sort of like having a little pitter-patter? Is it meaningless? Are dreams meaningless? And then again, the New Agers come in and they find all kinds of occult, astrological, this and that ways of interpreting dreams. Or is there something going on here? The layers of consciousness, where does mind come from? And, does our life have meaning or not? Because if we're just here to biologically survive and pass on our genes, well, that's all fine and good. But if that's your summary of the total meaning of biological life, how can you derive any bigger meaning to existence itself? It kind of gets cold pretty quickly, if you know what I mean, especially if we're challenged. When things aren't going right, then what do we turn to? And it's a focus on the flesh. And this profoundly limits our not only our intellect and creative abilities, but our character and our faith, our willingness to suffer. And love requires suffering and sacrifice, of course. So hence you see broken families and marriages that don't last. Now that's the norm. And children aren't getting the right nurturing from two loving parents, and nor are they getting the discipline and education, because those values are they've been left by the wayside with this new way of thinking. So I think that the consequences are quite apocalyptic, actually, in the long run.
There's another aspect when it comes to the materialist and love, which is the concept of the good. You will get a materialist to admit that there is the good. For example, if I offer them a piece of chocolate, most people, materialists, will say, yes, I want it because it's good. I love chocolate. Okay, so they admit of the good, most of them. And then you give them 2 chocolate bars and they can say, this one's better. Okay. And colloquially, they will admit that this is the best chocolate I've ever had, but they don't mean it. Okay. But when I talk about the good and the better, I know there is a best. I know that there's an infinite perfection and an infinite source of every good, and that's called God. The materialist doesn't have that. The materialist has a universe which is in flux and that is changing, and therefore is not a stable source of the good. It's because if it's changing, then if it was perfect, it no longer is. If it had perfection, it's prone to lose it because it's changing. So the notion of the good and the better implies the best. It's a proof of the existence of God. And this is like an aesthetic proof of the existence of God through beauty, through goodness. Chocolate proves the existence of God because there's good chocolate. Chocolate is good. There's better chocolate. And again, we don't need to say, as a lot of materialists will say, aha, so God's a piece of chocolate in the sky. Aha, that's absurd. Therefore, I reject God. No, God is infinite in every pure perfection, which means every perfection it's better to have than not to have. It's not better to be chocolate than not, so God is not a piece of chocolate. And this will come into play when we talk about the Transcendentals.
Yes. The notion of perfection is transmuted into an evolutionary worldview. So they do have their
They're getting better.
Their parallel belief.
Ubermensch.
And so progress as a religion, and this idea of evolution, which, remember, is, in their eyes, glacial. It moves very slow. It's gradual. The whole coming into being is gradual, and it takes time. Whereas the Catholic point of view is that grace is instantaneous, and coming awake is an instantaneous thing. The blinds on the windows of your soul, and the dirt, the crust, and the scales that are blinding you from the light can fall away in an instant. And the desire for grace, the desire to see God, is not this long mountain that you do one little step at a time and put your faith in progress, so maybe your offspring or your great-grandchildren will finally see the light of God. You want it now. You want to bust through now, and it involves will, it involves love, it involves faith, whereas the evolutionary point of view is, well, the world is what it is, let's get what we can out of life while we're here, and put our hope in the priests of science that humans will progress. And the way I see it is that we're not progressing at all. First, even by a scientific and biological point of view, I don't think human beings have evolved one iota in thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. We are the same people we were a long time ago. And if anything, we keep bounding from one mistake to another and devolving, falling into error constantly, and our errors become more and more fatal as we get more powerful. So from a logical point of view, from a scientific point of view, biological point of view, it's false. It doesn't add up. So just to sort of drive the point home, it's absolutely essential that we do not lose our metaphysical sense and the ideal of the higher good and the idea of eternity, because the result is all that nonsense that we just talked about.